But so today we're going to be talking about Appalachian foodways, and it seemed most fitting to start with corn. Um, Now, corn is something that we eat a lot in our diet today, like no matter pretty much where we live, just about in the world. Corn is in all kinds of things. It's even in plastics. It's even in gas tanks. It's like quite the plant. I think in central Mexico when they were first starting to domesticate corn, probably from the teosinte or something really similar. Um, that I had think they had no idea how corn would change the world, and it certainly did. But specifically, we're going to be talking about corn in Appalachia because it's kind of like the bedrock food of um, of Appalachian foodways, and it's in a lot of food. And other kinds of food are even grown on it. In fact, people even slept on corn. I mean, it was really a part of everyone's life in a pretty incredible way. People made fiddles out of their corn shuck cornstalk fiddles out of their corn stalks, which I've never been able to get a very good one, but they're an interesting and it's a real thing. The people that did. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna hop over here, unless anyone has any questions, to start off the day. Queries. But if we don't, I'll go ahead and kick us over into this spreadsheet. Presentation, yeah. All right. My brain's moving a little slow today. Could be Lyme's disease. I hope we'll see. Okay. Share screen. I'll just share screen in general. Where are you, little present button? Why did they change everything? Sarah, where's the present button? Where's the go? Ah, is it this? Yes, here we are. Okay, so we have our little thing here. I don't know why it's not the very end. Let's start at the beginning here. Ah, no. Okay. All right. So we're talking about corn in Appalachia. It's really, really important. People made music on it. People slept on it. People made toys out of it. People made seats out of it. But most importantly, they ate it and they fed it to their animals, which they then in turn ate and used to work around the farm. Let's see here. So corn comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And everyone hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So it comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and particularly heirloom corn um, is so diverse. There were so many different kinds that were bred in so many different places. I mean, if you think about 100 years ago, 95% of people in this country farmed on one level or another. Now about 5%, maybe less do. But if you think about that 95% of people all growing heirloom seeds, so they're all passing down seeds, they're all paying attention to their crops and going, well, that's kind of neat. I wonder if we should save that blue corn that came out of nowhere and maybe it'll come back blue next year. Um, so if you think about all those people, 95% of people were passing down heirloom seeds. They didn't go to a seed catalog. Sometimes they did, but a lot of times they grew their own community seed. They got seeds from preachers. They got seeds from cousins. They got them from their family. A lot of times when you got married, your mother traditionally would give you family seeds to start your own garden. It's a really, really neat tradition. It still goes on. Um, my neighbors here, when they got married, their mother gave them all their family corn and beans and different things, and tomatoes. So it was an important part of housemaking, people called it, when a new couple would move into a little cabin and they would give them seeds, but also furniture and all kinds of things so they could start their life together. But seeds were probably one of the very most important things that people would share. But again, if you think about that many people, 95% of people growing those seeds, that there'd just be so much diversity. There'd be a lot going on, a lot of different people live in a lot of different places. So there was all this richness. Everything was a lot of different everything was different. So like if you think about everyone having their own corn, that's just a ton of varieties. Now we've lost that. So if we're down to 5%, it follows that we've lost about 95% of our heirloom seeds, but we still have some. And I'm going to talk about some varieties that people have clung onto. And a lot of times you'll hear a story that came down to one ear that was the last one in existence, but somebody started growing it again. But there's a lot of different kinds of corn, and they look all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are really tall. I've grown corn that was 17 feet tall, the plant. That is huge. Most people, well, I'll talk a little bit about this later. They grow, sweet corn, and it might be like 7 feet tall. I didn't believe it when the Bryants, Sharon and Jimmy, gave me their corn. They said, "Be careful, it can get 17 feet tall over where you're living." And I said, "Yeah, sure." And sure enough, I got out the measuring tape, which it's hard to hold a measuring tape straight up in the air if you've never tried that. But it's true. I had 17-foot tall corn plants, but it would be across the board. So you'd have them all different heights and also different colors. So you can see here in this picture, there's all different colors. There's all different shapes of kernels. I did this really cute thing year before last where I cut my corn in half, and then I realized it made these pretty little flower things, which are just pretty, and they make nice little ornaments. But if you look at them, you can see, I don't know if my cursor shows up or not, does it?
I think we don't have it on share screen somehow.
Yeah, we
I'm still
just.
seeing the four
I
of
was gonna
us.
say that.
Oh, you're not seeing the share screen?
No.
Oh, well, thanks for just following along there, guys. I must have accidentally closed it here. Let's see. Let's try this again. Take two.
I have it anyway.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, all right. Just don't let me hit escape. Okay, so here we are, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, Sarah. But here's this picture that I was looking at that no one else, maybe Wendy was looking at somehow. And so you can see all the different kinds of corn. It might be hidden by the little faces on the corner. I don't know if me moving it moves it for you as well. But if you see over here on the top right corner, it looks like these little flowers. And I like this picture because it demonstrates all the different shapes, some of the different shapes that corn can come in. Now, if you were to look at corn from all over the world, it'd be even more diverse than that. There's some that are like, little itty bitty bitty corns, and some that are like 2 feet long. I mean, there's an amazing diversity. But you can see some of these are pointy on the outside. Some of them are kind of dented. Some of them are round. There's just a lot of different diversity here. This one in the middle, I got this from a feller over in Burnsville, outside of Burnsville, Bald Creek, when I was getting a corn sheller, and we got to talking, and he said, "Well, I've got some of my family's corn. You sound really into this kind of stuff." So he gave me an ear to go start some of my own, and I have been I've been heirloomed a good number of like beautiful special Appalachian corns. But another thing I think that's interesting is you'll see that the cobs sometimes are just come in all different colors. We normally think of corn like this, like yellow, corn, and yellow dent corn like took over the country in terms I think like yellow dent number 2 became this corn that everybody grows. Now everybody grows Monsanto corn pretty much, which is a whole different kit and caboodle. I won't get into that today. But these heirlooms, a lot of times in the mountains, people were growing white corn. Now, that's not always true, but that was like very typical. I've talked to people that say they remember the first time they ever saw a yellow ear of corn. And I've talked to other people that are like, "I ain't eating that." you know. But white was very common. The Cherokee grew white corn down here in the bottom right. This is some Cherokee flour corn, and it just makes some of the most beautiful cornmeal. And they ate it other ways too. And up here on the left, this is Jimmy and Sharon Bryant's field corn. That's the 17-foot tall corn I was talking about. And down here, there's a little bit of a, and I think that this is mostly a popcorn, but this top one here looks to be more of like a regular field corn. I'll talk about those differences as we go on. Okay, well, here's an interactive thing, and I will give you 2 points. And Sarah, I think I'm going to hold you back from this unless no one else speaks because you do a lot of foodways like stuff, so you might be able to answer all of these. But Roma and Wendy, I am going to ask you if you have any idea what these different dishes are that we have up here. And they're not, this is not like a trick question. They're not hard. There's no tricks. Some of them are a little hard to make out, but I just want to see if you can identify these. We'll start with the top left. This is a biggie.
That's the biggie. Is that, it's not a polenta, is it?
No, but that's that's a very fine grinding of cornmeal. In fact, that's finer than a lot of people would have traditionally ground it. But that all that polenta is finely grown. But it is similar to polenta in that it's like a little like a kind of cake that then you put on a skillet and fry up. But it is not polenta. Roma, do you have any ideas? It's also not usually like put on a plate with like a parsley garnish in the middle or whatever, or kale or whatever that is. That's a very fancy. I kind of cracked up when I saw that picture. Normally you'll see it like thrown with like an egg on top of it, or you might see it inside a biscuit. If you were to go into, oh, you have an idea?
Cornbread?
Oh, I mean it's so almost cornbread. It's really close. Now, so if you were to go into like a gas station, a lot of places in the mountains where they have, particularly in West North Carolina, places where they have like biscuits and stuff for sale, like some hot, you're on the way to work food. You might find biscuits and gravy. And another thing you might see is just biscuits, but then you might see some that on the top they write liver mush. Now that sounds so disgusting. I mean, that is just one of the grossest. Like liver doesn't sound good, even if you like liver. It just is a gross sounding word, liver. And then on the other hand, mush. Like, what? Let me just get that mush. I don't care what you put in front of mush. I don't think it's gonna sound good. Like, I don't think anything with mush in the front. Like, I get some ice cream mush. Ugh. Yeah, so all that liver mush is basically cornmeal that is mixed up with non-desirable parts of pigs. So what that is the stuff that wouldn't necessarily make it into sausage or bacon. A lot of times it's the head meat. I'm not advocating for cruelty to animals or anything that like that, but that that is what liver mush is made from. A lot of times, it's not really that much liver as much as head meat. That's and so it was a way that people could preserve or make more use out of an animal. I mean, if you are going to take an animal's life, you should use like every single bit of it, and that was very much a part of like mountains people's ethic is not to waste anything ever, and so they wouldn't waste that. I mean, a lot of like head meat kind of stuff's not necessarily that great to eat on its own, but it when you stretch it out with a grain, it's really good. Now these like meat and grains type mixture things are like all over the South and other places. There's different things. One that I should mention, now it's not corn based, but I should mention it while we're talking about grain meat kind of sausagey things that people did to stretch out their larder. For the year is one of them is scrapple. You may be familiar around Pennsylvania. They're known for scrapple, and I think scrapple uses corn. Is it got cornmeal in it? I should know that. But scrapple's one. Geta is Goetta is one of my favorites, and that's actually made with pinhead oats or steel cut oats. But anyway, these were a common kind of a thing that people did. So that's liver mush. And if you want to really have liver mush, go to, if you're in Western North Carolina, I think both you people live places where you could go to like an Ingles, or like maybe a Piggly Wiggly or a Food Line, and I'm sure those places will have Hunter's liver mush. If they don't, they might have Niece's liver mush, which is, everyone would agree that I think that Hunter's is the like creme de la creme of liver mush, unless you like have a grandma that'll make it for you. And the people that had grandmas that made it for them, this, if they buy store-bought liver mush, it is Hunter's. They even have, I think they have a liver mush festival in Marion, which is where Hunter's is, Marion, North Carolina. So just so you know, that's liver mush. It's really good if you slice it thin, fry it, put an egg on it, or in a biscuit. Sounds disgusting, tastes delicious. Kind of like biscuits and gravy, looks disgusting, tastes delicious. But so anyway, so moving down here, what about this one right below it here? I don't know if you can see my cursor. I'm gonna imagine you can. How about this one, Roma? Oh, no. Roma or Wendy, do you have any thoughts?
That's maybe one of my,
Well, I mean, technically, I think you would call this a porridge. But specifically, what about you, Wendy? You have an idea?
thinking that might be something we really eat a lot of when we go to Louisiana. Is it grits?
Oh, yes. Yes. I hope that you have grits like at home and not just in Louisiana.
I do. In fact, I buy a kind of a grits from North Carolina. I can't remember the brand, but it's made here and it's wonderful. And
Oh, good.
they have, yeah, that's a favorite, you know.
Yeah. So grits is a coarser grain, a coarser grind of cornmeal, corn flour being, more of a tighter grain to cornmeal, and then grits is a little bit harder. My friend Jack Dillinger, who runs a mill right over the hill from me. It's a very old mill, Dellinger's Mill. Really interesting place. He always said, I think it was, that cornmeal should feel like the soft part of your ear, the lobe, if you feel it. That's what cornmeal should feel like. And that grits should feel like your big toe, the bottom of your big toe, when you've been running around barefoot all summer, which I love. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah, I need to put that in a song. But so yeah, grits is coarser ground. Now, I think what a lot of people traditionally did is they just go down, they'd carry their big sack of grain, which was very heavy, but these people were stout. You'd hear stories about people, going to visit their neighbors and never setting down the corn that's on their back. They just like stand there and hold this heavy thing that I'd be like dying to carry. But anyway, so they'd go down to the mill and they would take their corn, they'd give it to the miller, and he would, grind it up and take his share, which a lot of people were grumbled about, but that's how it worked. And when you get back home, you would further sift out the meal because some parts were a little grittier and some parts were finer. And so when you'd sift it to get the finer stuff for your cornbread, you'd be left over with what you would cook into grits, essentially. And if you go into an antique store, sometimes you can see the little grain sieves that people would use to get the different sizes. All right, well, let's go to this middle top here. Anybody have an idea? Looks very similar.
I think we had Thanksgiving last year. Is that possibly corn pudding?
Ooh, okay. So I would say that spoon bread and corn pudding, I'm not sure I could really tell you the difference. But yeah, I think they're actually the same thing. It's kind of like a casserole-ish texture to like real like cornbread. It's kind of can be hard to tell the difference between spoon bread and cornbread sometimes. But yeah, basically, I think that corn pudding is about the same thing. They might add some flour to corn pudding, but it's traditionally spoon bread would not have any flour in it. Flour wasn't something a lot of people had access to on a mountain farm, the three things you could not make yourself were coffee, and yeah, coffee.
Sugar.
Yes, coffee, sugar, and flour. Those are the three things you couldn't make. You could get corn flour. So that a lot of old, mountain foods did not have flour in them. That was kind of added later. A lot of people now put flour in their cornbread. If you read Ronnie Lundy's article, she talks about how sacrilegious it is to put flour in cornbread, and I agree. Actually, the most important thing is that you make cornbread. Whatever you put in, that's more important than anything. Okay, so talking about cornbread, I mean, I'm sure you can both tell the bottom one here is cornbread. Yeah, and you got to see Ronnie's article. Did everyone get to look at that article? Oh, Wendy. No, it's okay. It's okay. Well, anyway, it's a short article. The thing that I sent you, I do recommend you read it because Ronnie's a good writer, but also it's a really good recipe. And what I'm going to do, so make sure, Roma, I don't know if I have your all's address, but I want to send some seeds. I might have it, but I want to send you some seeds and some cornmeal that I've ground up. Um, and so then you could follow that recipe and make your own cornbread. And I just got to tell you that cornbread, like follow that recipe, grind it up, and that's very similar to my mother's recipe. But grind it up yourself. Well, I'll send it ground. And then you should be able to sift it out and get some grits too, which is cooking those is very different than instant grits. But anyway, so yeah, cornbread, that's a staple. Something that's kind of similar, hoe cakes. Sarah, are you familiar with hoe cakes? Yeah, so the story is that people would like put basically these little balls of dough, cornbread dough essentially, though I think it was a little thicker on a hoe handle, and they'd put that in the fire and they'd cook it, and that made it a hoe cake. I think that it was more like they put the balls of dough like in the hot coals and had to hoe them out. Because I don't know why you would risk your like very important hoe over the fire. That doesn't sound like a good idea at all, unless yeah, and there's not a lot of surface area. But like a lot of times the hoe cakes were actually like they'd put them into the coals. Question?
I thought they put it on the metal part of the hoe and then stuck that on top of the fire.
Well, right. See that's the story. I have a little bit of suspicion of the story. Just because the way I've seen hoe cakes portrayed in songs and people talking about them usually doesn't have to do with a hoe, and so I'm wondering if it actually is the action of you having to hoe it, essentially, like like you almost like in your garden, out of the ashes. I don't know, but it has. I've not tried hoe cakes before, but they probably have a very unique flavor profile, I imagine. Um, but so that's another one. And now, so over here, and this is a big one. This is like the most important. Okay, what's that? Wendy, I saw you raise your hand.
No, I was just swishing an ant.
Oh.
Sorry. In my studio, and the ants have decided to make a visit. So
yeah, I'm very bee-anted myself here right now. They're kind of coming across the keyboard and everything. Last year I had a big ant war in my kitchen. That was impressive and gruesome. And it's weird how like the victors take their to carry off their dead, and like the losers don't. It's just like human warfare. It's very bizarre. I think Thoreau he wrote like a whole chapter in Walden's Pond, I think, about like two ants like warring together. But anyways, so down here on the bottom right, now the top up here, that's just a picture of field corn. I'll talk about that particular kind, but you see the kernels are very different looking than sweet corn, silver queen, let's say, that is real shriveled up. Now, so it's a little hard to make out. I don't know if this picture is in the way. On the bottom right here, does anyone know what this is? This is like honestly the most important food stuff of like Appalachian eating corn, going back to the
Corn?
Cherokee. Huh?
Corn?
It is corn. Yes, it is corn. Um, but this is a particular kind of corn which has been nixtamalized, which is a very fancy word for making hominy. Hominy is basically you can take lye, which is a product that you make out of ashes. So this is something you can all have on the farm. You may take that lye and you soak the kernels, and it breaks down the shell of the kernels. Now, lye is not something that you want to consume, so you take them after they've swelled up, and that the husk has broken down, and you put them in a big sack, and then you beat the snot out of them, because you want to remove that husk. And what comes out of that, is these very interesting kind of corn, like puffy corn things. Now, if you've ever seen like corn nuts for sale, I'm pretty sure they're just roasted hominy. Um, Now, the reason that this is so important, um, was that there are a lot of nutrients in corn, uh, just a lot of nutrients in corn. However, the human body actually cannot digest them. So there's all this. In fact, eating corn is not all that super great for you. Um, but because and a lot of the value is missed. A lot of the nutritional value is missed. Now, when you put it through this nixtamalization, um, process, and you'll hear the word tamal in there if you're familiar with tamales, which is a corn. I don't know if you've ever. Has everyone had tamales here? Can we all? Roma, no tamales. So tamales are basically a traditional. That'd be a Native American, South American, food stuff where they take a corn mash, a meal like we were talking about. They might put some meat in there. They wrap it in a corn leaf and they steam it, roast it, and that's a tamale. Um, and that the word tamal is in that nixtamalization, and that's one way to kind of help remember that weird word. But it's really important because what it does is it makes all this nutrition available for your body. Now, it's a lot of work to make hominy, and some people just hate it. They just don't like the taste of it. I think it's unbelievably delicious. I remember the first time I had hominy, and you can just go to any grocery store where they have canned foods, and they'll have hominy. And I think it's really good. I like the I like hominy, but it was a really important thing. So when the tamales, what they're doing is they're mashing up the hominy, putting and putting that in the corn, husk, and then putting some meat in there, and that's a tamale. It's really good. If you go to a Mexican restaurant or something, not that we go to restaurants as much as we used to, but if you do, they'll have tamales. I think they're super good. Um, okay, so we talked a little bit about corn. Now, there's three primary kinds of corn. Yeah, I'll go ahead and stand by that. There's three kinds of corn. There's field corn, which is what we have been talking about. There's popcorn, and there's sweet corn. Now, these things are all very different. You usually don't get all three, out of whatever corn you're planting. Field corn is what you use for making cornbread, hominy, all these things that we mentioned before. And that's also what you feed your livestock. So not only would you take the corn that you weren't going to eat yourself, you'd raise a lot of it so you could give it to your animals. Not only that, you'd also do things like cut down all that fodder, they called it, the stalks that now people like put up for decorations. Well, in the old days, those shocks of corn, as they called them, that was for people's cattle to eat, over the winter, and or hogs too. I hear stories about people going out in the field and they'd cut off the tops of the corn plant above where it was making corn, so it still continued to develop. But then that long stalk they would feed to their hogs. They go out and get a few every day, and corn has a lot of sugar inside it. There's a lot that helps animals put on weight. So it was really good for that. But that's all the stuff the field corn does. Also, if you've heard about like the Three Sisters, or the four sisters, growing the beans up your corn stalks. You can't really do that well with modern like sweet corn, which we'll talk about what sweet corn is. But field corn is what people do that to because it's like robust, it's strong, it's made for being out in the field with the wind and all that. And it's just tough. It's also just it can hold up very vigorous beans, and some beans will tear like little corn to pieces. So that's a good thing to know if you ever decide to do a Three Sisters thing. Make sure you have the right corn, or you'll just the beans will tear your corn down. But in the middle of here we have popcorn, and popcorn. I guess you could mill popcorn. I just wouldn't recommend it. But popcorn, basically, we know what that is. It explodes, but it's its own kind of different thing from field corn. But sweet corn is the main thing that people eat. So Silver Queen is like the best known variety. That's what my dad always planted. And it has when you see the seeds, they're like super shriveled. You can see how different the seeds are here. They're like really shriveled. And if you try to grind them up like they're little rocks, like it's really hard. They'll like break your teeth if you try to make meal out of them. But they are really sweet when they're in the milk stage, is what we call it, when you bite into a soft ear of corn. And they have a really different flavor. They convert sugar in a different way than the starches in field corn convert. So a lot of old timers would eat just field corn as corn on the cob, and they loved it. And they'd be like, "Yeah, I don't like, it has this unique flavor." A lot of people that grew up on sweet corn, when they try to eat like field corn in the milk stage for the first time, they're like, "Ew, this is weird." And it has a different flavor. You just have to be used for the different flavor to appreciate it, I would say. But it's just very different kinds of corn, and sweet corn generally is very small. It's made for taking to market. It doesn't try to do all the things that field corn does. Field corn is like the Swiss Army knife of the farm, and sweet corn is like the butter knife of the farm. I don't know what we'd call it if we're talking about knives. But you got to keep like a sweet corn well away from your field corn. Corn pollinates over distances of like a quarter mile or more, pollinated by the wind. So if you're trying to grow a big stand of field corn and your neighbor or you're in the same garden, you have sweet corn, you'll open up your corn at the end of the year and have all these shriveled corn cobs on there. Likewise, their sweet corn might have some really weird tasting kernels in it when they go to eat it, because they'll mix. Corn wants to do that. It's very accepting of other corns. But anyway, so that's the differences there. The sweet corn is just a totally different thing. Field corn is its own thing, and popcorn is its own thing. So like I was talking about, all the things that we did to eat, what mountain people did food-wise with corn, which is a lot of things. But one of the big things that the mountains were known for was producing hogs. And this is particularly before the Civil War. It wasn't like cowboys like out west. It was like hog boys. I don't think anyone called them that, but they were hog drovers. And so what a lot of mountain families would do was they would grow hogs. You can read back in the journals of I forget his name. I think Henry. Anyway, the Lenore that started Fort Defiance, which is a place outside of Lenore, which was named after him and that family. He was a Revolutionary War hero, and he had a farm there, and he was writing notes, or this might have been his son was writing notes about his frustration because they had let out all their hogs, which is what people did, so they could go out and eat chestnuts, and they could get all big and fat. And then what you do is then you offer up all the corn to get them to come back, because they did not want to come back because there was so much to eat out in the woods. They just docked their ears in certain ways, so everyone knew, like, oh, well, that particular nick on that hog's ear, it means that it belongs to Jimmy. And so they all knew that, even though the hogs were just all over the woods. And then to bring them back in the fall when they wanted to process them, they would put out the corn. But it was interesting to hear his frustrations that there was so many chestnuts and so many acorns and so much mast, which is what they call, and walnuts and all that stuff, all the nuts that had fallen, that they couldn't get him to come. There was just so much to eat in the woods that the pigs didn't give a hoot about all the corn that they had, and so he was very frustrated. But people would take these hogs and they would drove them. They had particular kinds of dogs that were meant for doing this. If you've ever seen a mountain cur, a lot of what their history was not so much as like a bear dog, but or not mountain cur, blackmouth cur was as dogs that they used on these droving trips. A lot of dogs back then were multi-purpose because you wanted stuff that could do all kinds of things, not be extremely specialized. But that was one of the things that blackmouth curs, which are an awesome dog, would do is to help manage these hog droves. And I'd much rather drive cows than I would hogs. Hogs are really smart. I think they'd outsmart me. But people would take them a long ways and they'd go along and they'd get hogs from people that had grown them, and they'd drive them on these big droves on like the Buncombe Turnpike, on these roads that would go down to Spartanburg and places where they could maybe put them on a train or take them to a big place where they could process them. And that was a big part of the Appalachian economy. And there's even towns still named, like an example in Madison County, there's a place called Allen Stand. And it's called that because there was a hog stand there where one of the ways people generated wealth in the early days is they'd have just a giant pen. So when these hog drovers came through, they'd put all the hogs in this big pen. They'd have a bunch of corn there. They could feed the hogs while the people were staying, and they would make money off of that. And so there's little towns, places that have the name Stand in them, and a lot of times that's where that comes from. And so this is an image here. I've kind of blown up the top, but you can see where they've got the dogs. Looks kind of like maybe a sheep. I don't know. These actually look like sheep. But this could show you kind of the drove. This is down along the French Broad, so that's probably on their way to Marshall or something like that. I'm not exactly sure where Paint Rock is along the French Broad, but there was a big thoroughfare. That's where they would take all kinds of cattle. And so corn was like corn and chestnuts, so all the stuff in the wild, but corn was what helped make all that work. And it was just a really, really important part of things. So like I said, mountain people didn't just eat corn, they didn't just feed it to their animals, they also slept on it. So this is a straw tick bed, or a lot of times in the mountains they'd put corn shucks in them. And I've heard that they're actually pretty comfortable, if they're done right, and if you know what you're doing when you sleep in them. But if you see, see all these little rope holes? Yeah, so rather than having, and I have a bed like this upstairs that I haven't put it together, but the ropes would just go across. You kind of wove them in a special way, and that's what this big giant pillow would lay on, and that was your tick. I don't know why they called it a tick, maybe for gross reasons. Maybe when you fill it all full of whatever you're going to sleep on, it looks like a big fat tick. I don't know why they call it a tick. Or maybe ticks look like a tick. Curious. We'll never know the etymology of it. But anyways, so what they do is they just stuff it full of corn shucks. They might stuff it full of straw, but in the mountains a lot of times it is corn shucks. Corn husks. There is also a fiddle tune by the name of Sleeping on a Corn Cob Bed. That sounds miserable, but it's a great tune. But anyways, so yeah, and my friend Ray, who grew up sleeping on a bed like this, he said it's kind of nice. You could kind of sort of like burrow in there in the winter and get pretty nice and cozy in them. But that's a straw tick bed. And now also people would sit on them. They would weave the corn husks together to make a kind of a rope that then they would make a chair out of. And Sarah, I'm sure you're curious like me. I just found this like on Google image search, and I'm desperately interested to find out more about this picture. Do you recognize this?
I don't know. I was going to text you immediately
Okay.
after the class to ask who is
No,
that.
I think I'm gonna have to like put it into Google and search the image and see if I can find like a Library of Congress thing or something. But yeah, this feller here, he's putting the corn shuck seat on the chair there. So people use it for all kinds of things. Corn husk dolls, those are really fun to make. Um, and that's something that goes back to the Cherokee and other groups that lived in the mountains. They all had corn husk dolls. Also, I think that they had those corn shuck fiddles too, which is pretty cool. And I've always loved corn husk dolls. There was a woman that lived here in Mitchell County that made beautiful ones. In fact, we have our tree topper at Christmas time is a corn husk doll that she made and of an angel. It's really cool. Um, and people use them for all kinds of things. It's really just amazing how much use you could get out of the corn there. So once you've grown your corn, which was quite an involved process, especially if you imagine having to hoe acres and acres and acres of corn. You didn't have a machine necessarily to go between the rows. You'd have to be out there hoeing the weeds, and piling up the the soil onto the roots of the corn so that it can put down stronger roots. Now I sort of feel like maybe back then, in the old days, they didn't have quite as many intense weeds as we do. I think our our weeds are a little more serious, and at that time we've had a lot of time to spread unwanted seeds from all over the world that make gardening tougher. Um, but anyway, so yeah, it's a lot of work. Now, if you had 11 kids, you could really put them to work, especially at different heights. It really is helpful when you're picking beans in the corn that you send the 3-year-old for all the low ones, and then the 6-year-old can get the ones a little above that, and then everybody can go along. Works out great. Now, these are corn shellers. And so this one is a very simple corn sheller that my friend Jimmy made, and a few years ago I grew Jimmy's corn. That was a 17-foot tall corn, but he sent me a handmade little corn sheller that he had made, and this is the corn that I have. And then he made a great little note. I want to see if I can read it. It says, "Will, use the point to stick through the shuck. Put your sociable finger," I love that, "in the leather loop. After shucking, use the body to shell with." I can't remember who showed me how to make them, Jimmy. Um, and then he shows a great little image here of how to do it. So it helps you pull the shuck off, and then it helps you to knock the kernels off. Really important thing, because this old corn, especially his, it has like these teeth on it, and they will tear your hands to pieces. And so this is really helpful. But then things got a little more advanced, and people had corn shellers. This is a little different than the one that I have. Mine's a little fancier because it has a nubber right in the middle of the big spoke. And what the nubber does is the very tip parts of your corn. I wonder if I have a corn cob. I don't. But on a corn, so there's like a on either end, that those pieces of corn are mostly undesirable, especially the tip end that has the silks. Because sometimes the worms get in there, it gets kind of gross. They don't make very good seed. And so a nubber, while everything's spinning, you stick the nubber in there and it takes off that part of the seed or that part of the cob. So then you kind of can get the ugly parts off of there. But then you just throw the cob in there, and these teeth kind of come together, and then it just spits out a cob. The other fancy thing about mine is it's got a little, you can put a motor on a little, this looks like it has it, yeah. So it has a version of it that there's chaff. So on the cob, there's this kind of like flaky stuff. And so it blows on it. It makes a little fan that blows it out. And so you get your cobs, you get your kernels, and it works out really well. It's very exciting and very fun. It's a good thing to bring to a party, but make sure it's supervised because all old tools are dangerous. So always be careful. But yeah. So and then things got more and more advanced. Where now there's these combines that come along on the field, and they just like eat rows and rows of corn at a time, and somehow magically the little teeth go in there and they pull off the corn cob, and then they shell it, and then they spit out or sometimes they just keep it together, but sometimes they shell it there too. It's a crazy thing. um Now, the funny thing though is like if you tried to combines now are so dialed in, they're made for like certain kinds of corn that are certain height. If you tried to send a combine through Jimmy's corn, which is like 17, 12 feet tall, it would get all fouled up and messed up because it's made for diminutive corn, that's all spiky and angry looking. That's you can tell GMO corn. It just looks real spiky. A friend of mine, uh, James Leva, he calls it angry corn, and I've always liked that. Um, so, I talked a little bit about milling. Like I said, people would go down and they'd mill their corn. This is over. This is the mill I was talking about. I've been climbing up on that thing, replacing pieces before. And it is a fascinating thing to go upstream and open the flue and see all the water come down, and then like to turn this wheel. And this wheel they brought over Yellow Mountain, which is a big mountain. I think it was shipped down on the train from Ohio. And if people could move that wheel over that mountain, I think people can do anything. It's pretty incredible. But there's a lot of great history with this, and it's a really interesting place if you ever have a chance to go there in the summer. I know Jack is in a nursing home now, but I think his daughter is running it now. But that was just a really important part of the community's mills. Not only was it a place that you could go and mill up your corn, but it's also a lot of times they functioned as a sawmill too. So the water, the wheel, they could change the belts, move some things around, and then they could have a saw blade too. So they would saw up lumber for the community. Reuben Dillinger and some of the other Dillingers were known as being kind of like doctors, not certified doctors, but they'd like order books about doctoring in the mail and then just read them and try to treat people as best they could, or pull teeth, things like that. So there was a lot going on at the Millers. And also, if you were into folklore, that is a place where like a lot of magical things would happen at the mill. And there's a great history to that. I think partly too that a lot of mills, some places no one was there, so they just were left on. The miller might come check on it, but it's not like you just sat there and waited for people to come along and mill up their corn. There was like a country ethic of like, yeah, well, I'll leave a little bit of share in the bin here, and I'll grind it, and then I'll go. And the miller had stuff to do himself. Might be pulling teeth, might be out hoeing his own big patch of corn. Jack Dillinger, who had this mill, his big job as a kid was to be hoeing and doing all the things you need to do to take care of corn up on top of the mountain across the road. And he said all he ever wanted to do was get out of that corn patch on the top side of the mountain and go out in the world and get away from there. Of course, then he retired and he started grinding corn, which is really, really cute. And he retired from NASA or Boeing 1. He built the computers that went on some of the Apollo missions, which is incredible because he was colorblind, and it's very important that you put wires in the right place. So anyways, great story, really interesting guy. And if they're still milling, that is some really good cornbread. Hickory King, which is a variety of corn, heirloom corn, well known, that they grind up there. It's really good stuff. And they grind polenta, Wendy, if you ever get a chance.
Never been successful making polenta, but I have hope.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I've never tried to make it either. Come to think of it, I just get so excited about cornbread. I'd like to talk about all the different varieties of heirloom mountain corn that I know, but that would be like a year-long class in its own. So I'm just going to talk about one, and picking one was tough. But this is the one that I planted this year, and it's called Hamburg corn. Now, the reason that it's called Hamburg corn is that the town of Hamburg is where people grew it. The town, the area, they all grew this corn called Hamburg, and it's kind of a short corn, doesn't get all that tall. It's a short season. In other words, it doesn't need a long year to come in. So for Hamburg, which to give you an idea about how like the weather in Hamburg, the next little place over to it is called Little Canada. So gives you an idea that it's kind of cold up there. Short season, so they needed a short season corn. But the town of Hamburg is underwater. It is no more. There's still sort of a Hamburg community, but it is one of the Appalachian communities that was submerged by the TVA to build dams and hydroelectric power to fuel the war effort. Fortunately, in our little neck of the woods here, up in Mitchell County, they didn't build a lot of dams. There were some low dams, but not big dams like the Fontana Dam or the dam that I guess the Glenville Dam might be the name of it. But Lake Glenville is the lake that Hamburg is under. And so when people left the town of Hamburg, they brought this seed with them. And other seeds. There's a lot of stories in Appalachia of people moving from where they were displaced by the government. I mean, they were given money for their property if they owned it. They might have been sharecropping and they didn't own it, and so they basically got very little from the government, if anything, and were forced to move. But they would take their seeds with them and take memories of that place, memories of the songs and things like that with them. And so they continued some people to grow Hamburg corn, but almost nobody continued to grow Hamburg corn. So I am going to play this little recording. Now, this I recorded John Leopard up in Tuckasegee, North Carolina, which is just downstream from this dam. And he had an amazing seed saver, also just a really fascinating person. And he basically rescued Hamburg corn from just being completely gone. So now I think maybe it's like me, maybe one other person, and John are probably the only people growing Hamburg corn. Unless some of the people I've given it to have kept it up. And that can be a big thing because you should grow at least 200 plants of corn if you want to save seed. Ideally, 400 would be better. So that's a pretty good patch of your garden. But remember, you can use it to grow some beans on, so that way you don't have to put up beans. But let me see, and tell me if you can hear this. Can anybody hear it? Okay. Let me make sure the sharing is. Let's see. Share sound. Now let's see. And I just love this video. Let's see if I can start it.
Well, I messed around and didn't save none whenever my mom and dad had it. And I went up there to a guy that I know that used to save, grow that corn.
Mm-hmm.
And he had one ear. I went back up there and asked John Lee Bentley. I said, John Lee, have you got any corn that your daddy used to grow or Joe used to grow? And he said, John, I've got one ear. And he said, I'm not going to plant it. He said, you can have it.
Wow.
And I planted one ear. That's how close that seed got from being gone, is one ear, about that long. And I brought it down there to my mother. She had a patch plowed up, no sweet corn or nothing. And I brought that down there to my mother's, and I planted every butt grain, round grain, and everything. Every grain off of that ear of corn I planted. And that's where I got my seed that year.
All right, well, could everyone hear that? I hear that all right? Yeah, I know. It might have been hard to understand some of what John was saying if you're not real used to hearing people talk with that. He's got a beautiful accent. But basically, yeah, he as he got older, he just decided that he wanted to. I mean, not that much older. This was the 70s, and he's not that old of a feller. But he decided he wanted to start growing that corn again, and then he couldn't find anybody that had it. And he finally found this one guy that had one cob, and I love how he would show how big it was. And so there's some important knowledge that he puts in that story too. One of them is that I planted the bunt grains, I planted, the round grains, because traditionally people don't plant those. They don't make as good of the corn. I think they're a little harder for it to germinate, or they just tend not, if you I've done this before, to plant like the bunt grains and then the regular grains, and the regular grains are just fuller, bigger. They just start off better. So they typically would not plant those, but he said he planted every single kernel on that corn cob. And then the other fascinating thing, which isn't on that, so he didn't eat any of it. Every single ear that he got, he put in the freezer in 1978. And since then, he's grown it every year just from that original seed. He's not growing it from the later years. Everything's from 1978. So it's pretty amazing, and I feel very blessed to have some Hamburg corn. And I'm very excited to be growing it again. I can't grow the corn. I have to pick one corn every year. I can't do different corn. They'll cross. So I have to be very, very careful about what I grow, and I have to decide which is more rare. Kind of hard to say. I think about everything I'm growing like only one or two people grow. And that's what I'm hoping to, encourage y'all, encourage people to grow some of these very endangered but delicious. And I'm gonna send you some of Jimmy Bryant's corn, and it's dang good. That's some of the best cornbread you'll ever have. So just make sure I have your addresses, and I'll send you just enough to make some cornbread. Yeah, it's gonna be exciting. Now, like Ronnie Lundy points this out, and use her recipe, points it out that every cornmeal is a little different. So that it might, sometimes it'll bear a little experimentation. I'll try to send you enough that you can experiment more than once. But even if it kind of falls, even if it's kind of dense cornbread, it still tastes really good. So let's see. I'll go back to my presentation here. All right, and so last thing here, we're rounding out on the hour. We started a little late, but last thing is I'm going to sing a song for you guys. And so this is a song that I wrote. One of the kind of goofy things that I do is, and can everybody hear me? Hopefully, let me really quick look at my, I can turn Terra sound off, and I will turn on original sound. Okay. Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So this is a song that I wrote, kind of inspired by my visit to John Leopard's house. And this mentions a lot of different varieties of heirlooms, but the most important thing is trying to talk about that relationship that people would have with the seeds, as it being an important part of their life, and also if they would, be displaced by the building of a dam that would flood where their family had lived for 100 or so years, that they could take these seeds with them, and all the things that go along with that. Most of my songs about seed saving are really goofy, but this one's not as goofy. When I grow a garden, there's more than beans. There's memories, families, hopes, and dreams. Over there in the corner, it's Ma's Tommy Toes. We'll talk about those at a later date. And I fondly remember picking out of the snow. It's been growing here for many long years, through droughts and floods and hopes and fears. And in the springtime, I'm reunited with friends gone home. They burst from the ground with tendrils and tails. In the summer days, when I'm bringing in maters and beans, I'm setting the table with their hopes and dreams. Well, this white corn here, it's a special one. Well, they grew it in Hamburg for the TVA con. And they drowned the town with water so clear, and all that was left was one little ear. And them speckled beans out of Hazel Creek that the TVA filled up with water so deep. And the Laneys brought out that little bean as they carried their hopes and their memories and dreams. And in the springtime, reunited with friends gone home, they burst from the ground with tendrils and tails. And in the summer days, when I'm bringing in maters and beans, I'm setting the table with their hopes and dreams. Well, that bean there, running roughshod all over my garden with sunset pods. They kept in a freezer for 30-odd years, just a double handful, and I set 'em out here. And that big tomato, so yellow and fine, it happens to be an old favorite of mine. Frozen for 40 years or more, sleeping through funerals and birthdays and wars. And in the springtime, I'm reunited with friends gone home. Well, they burst from the ground with tendrils and tails. And in the summer days, when I'm bringing in maters and beans, I'm setting the table with their hopes and dreams. When I grow a garden, there's more than beans. There's memories, families, hopes, and dreams. Okay.
That was wonderful.
Oh,
Yes. Beautiful.
well, so either my allergies or something. I'm having a hard time singing. But I will say this very last, because I would be remiss not to mention it. There is a very important product that people would make out of corn. Um, it's uh, not cornbread salad, which is something that I didn't mention, but and that is alcohol. Very important medicinally, very important for early mountain entrepreneurs to be able to take their wares to market because, um, you know, you can only put so much corn in a wagon, but if you distill it down into a marketable product like alcohol, then you can take that to market. And also, it had just a lot of currency locally. For one reason, it doesn't go bad. I mean, you can just, it's a way to take a product and it doesn't go bad. And also, in the process of making alcohol, you have a lot of spent materials. The mash and all that stuff, when you're done, you can feed that to their cows. They love it. I mean, they just love it, or your hogs. So there was people just weren't making sure things weren't going to waste. And medicinally, that old time alcohol can really do a lot for you. If you're feeling like a head cold, feeling kind of sick, and you take a little bit of that with some honey, maybe some rock candy, and try to breathe in the vapors. It'll it'll really help. Cause and with some vinegar, put some vinegar in there, and then drink that hot liquid. And honestly, it really can help with a sore throat. Doesn't feel good. It's not soothing, except maybe afterwards. It kind of hurts stirring, but it really is something that can help. And if you want to know more about moonshine, like there's so much information out there to go find. And so I won't probably talk a lot about that, but it's an important part of the heritage. But so are all these other things people don't talk about. I think that a corn husk tick bed is just as exciting as liquor. So, anyways, well, thanks everyone. I will be sending out an email soon about our interview. So that's exciting with Sharon Bryant. And Sharon is one of the people that I got this corn from, and she makes a lot of traditional stuff. She also knows a lot about things out in the woods you can forage. She's just a neat old time mountain person. I love her. And so we're going to interview her, and I'll send you more about that. You don't have to be present at the interview, but if you can, that'd be really fun. But what I would like for you to do, this is your homework, and this is not difficult homework, is just think if you're sitting on the porch with somebody like John Leopard, but in this case it'll be Sharon. We're bringing her to our porch. Just think of some questions you might want to ask someone that grows traditional mountain corn and cooks with it, and just think about what kind of things would you ask. Could be anything. Could be about how they grow it. Could be about how they eat it. Could be about like, do they find liver mush disgusting? Those are all things. Just put together some questions and respond. Send them to me. They don't have to. You're not trying. We're not trying to win a Pulitzer or anything. Just like, what would you want to know? What would you want to ask? And send those to me, and we'll make sure that we ask them of Sharon when we do our live interview. So that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, and thank you those that are tuning in from home. And this is our Appalachian Foodways class, so thank you very much.
Thanks. Good to see you all.
Bye, guys.